Objects. What are objects? You know, objects tell stories. Objects are witnesses to history. Objects are like the tip of an iceberg of information. Look at this drafting instrument set. Who used it? What'd they design? Is it still standing? Who sat at this table? What great ideas got thrown in the trash? We never know. I've had a love affair with objects all my life. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and my parents would take me to the Smithsonian as a little kid and leave me off. That was my babysitter, the museum. I'd walk around, I'd push my face against the glass and study things. I'd want to learn about them, about their history, to unwrap them, to uncover them. Later, as an adult, I had to possess them, I had to own them. I started to collect. But there were those unobtainables, the things you couldn't buy, the things lost to history. So I'd build them. This architect's classroom, I actually built this. I spent 2,000 hours researching it, the pictures on the wall, the sprinkler heads, the light fixtures, the blueprint making machinery, every detail, the little tables that go up and down, the casters that work. But there's one big difference in what I do, and that is I do it in miniature. In a sense, I'm the opposite of the artist Claes Oldenburg. He takes everyday objects and blows them up huge, and I take strange little things and shrink them down. He does things for public, I do it for private. I miniaturize everything. The skate key, it actually works. Everything works. And why miniatures? Miniatures have been around since the beginning of time. I could use this whole talk to talk about why miniatures. You either get it or you don't. It really is that simple. But when you think about it, the Egyptians had miniatures, the ancient Chinese, the Renaissance, architectural models, the baubles of this in the Baroque period. In the 19th century, there's patent models and teaching tools, there's Fabergé. Every culture has had miniatures, and we've all loved them. One of my favorite was Queen Mary's dollhouse. In the 1920s, the people in England got together to build their queen a dollhouse. And authors like Kipling, he wrote an original book for it, as did others. Rolls-Royce built the cars, Purdy the shotguns. And this kind of thing impressed me as a little kid. And here I am at 11. And we see two things in common here. One, I like miniature objects, small things. And two, I like to collect. I was the strange little kid that would drag home a TV or a broken lawnmower out of someone's trash, and I made it run again. I'd take it apart, and it would run. By the time I was a teenager, I was taking cars apart, and I was the street racer that Bruce Springsteen sang about. I had this little corner workshop, and I learned that what I wanted that I couldn't buy, I could build. And I learned to build anything I wanted. And when I was 21, I thought, you know, I've always liked that miniature stuff. I want some of that. And I wanted a little desk. And my mother got this piece of junk mail in the mail with a little desk on it. I knew nothing about furniture, but I built that little desk. And I showed it to other people, and they wanted little desks. So the next thing I knew, I was in business making little furniture. And this really brought together my lifelong interests, my life at that point, which were making things, history, and small things. And I got to make them work. This clock kept time, the locks worked. And 40 years later, I'm still making these things. And I'm very lucky. My work is in private and public collections all over the world. I have to give a great deal of thanks to my parents. They were a little unconventional. They didn't make me go get a real job. They thought, fine, do that in the basement, whatever. know. I also have to thank all the people along the way that believed in my work and supported. I could have never done it without them. Back in my 20s, I kept thinking about that Queen's dollhouse. So I built a dollhouse for myself. And I built 2 of these. It was called Twin Manors. And there's 75,000 pieces in this. What you're seeing is a foot high, a mere 12 inches. This is the stairway. There's 1,000 pieces there. This is the drawing room. And the people here at Kansas City, we're really lucky because this house, the architect's classroom, a lot of other things I've made, and most important, the work of hundreds of other craftsmen, thousands of pieces, are all on public display at the National Museum of Toys and Miniatures down by the plaza. So go see it. What is it about these people making miniatures? In a sense, we're control freaks. We can freeze time. We can control an environment. The dishes never get dirty in this room. People ask me, they said, do you make things for the movies? No, I don't. In the movie model business, if the camera doesn't see the left side, they don't build it. Not only would I build the left side, but I build the way it has to be built. If this little cabinet, the spice cabinet, has dovetailed frame, I dovetail it. If the drawers are dovetailed, I dovetail those. If the lock works, I make microscopic parts for that lock. And when this piece is all together, it's only 1.25 inches high. And none of that work shows, but it has to be there. That's the only way I know how to make things, is the authentic, accurate way. And everything I do, people wonder about the materials. And I jokingly say I'm a woodworker, but no tree's ever been cut down because of me, because I only use 2 board feet of wood a year. I seek out the little runt of a tree that grew in the shadows of the big tree that for 300 years was in the shade, and it has very fine-grained wood. Here, this tabletop, or table bottom actually, from a Danish tea table, is made from a 400-year-old piece of yew wood with a scale knot and that oxidized finish. And not only do I capture the materials, I capture the tool marks the original craftsman would have left. And everything has to work. An architect's table, an English-style drafting table from the 18th century, you unlock it, you pull out the front, you slide the desk back, you lift up the top, the bookrest pops up automatic, there's mechanisms to lock it, there's mechanisms to hold it in place. It has a little ink drawer to keep the ink from filing your papers, the little candle slides pull out so your candles don't put a shadow on your drawing, casters that work, details. It's all about the details, they matter. And the research, you have to research. You can't build something unless you know what you're building. This 18th century French spinning wheel, I had the original in front of me. You'd think that's all I need, but no. I went to the original book that the maker of the original spinning wheel would have used. This is Bergeron's book of 1792. It describes it. From that, I made a drawing, and I do my drawings with pen and ink still. The drawing's in scale, and scale is nothing but a proportion between the full-size item and the miniature. And I might work to 3 decimal points, but the eye is the final judge. You have to make it look right. If it doesn't look right, why bother? And here's the wheels for that. The smallest one have 16 pieces in each, and the smallest one is smaller than a dime. And that steel shaft is threaded. The end of that screws on, and that thread is 0.3 millimeters. That's about 4 thicknesses of a human hair. And here's the finished spinning wheels, and they're in 1/12 scale, or 1 inch, and 1/6 in the full size. And as a reminder of how small it is, this is it. That's my thumb. Most people would be freaked out by this, but I'm at my most restful when I'm sitting at my workbench working. To me, it's a very calming thing. And people say, well, where do you get the patience for this? And I say, oh, it's real simple. I don't go to meetings, I don't answer the phone, and I never write memos. All artists and all craftsmen have a thing about their tools, and I'm no different. When I was 15, I worked in a hardware store, and I used to bring home half my paycheck in screwdrivers and pliers. And later, I built miniatures of tools. I still do. This is a little tool chest. I made everything in it, and it all works. That saw has teeth. You can't see them. There's 160 teeth to the inch, but you can feel them. And things like the plane actually works. And I have a whole dish of these on my workbench that I use all the time. I mean, how else am I going to plane a little piece of wood? But tools are more than just funny little things. You know, I think there's a 17th century hand vise. And when I'm using this, I think of a musician playing a Stradivarius violin. He's making art with art. And I get something from using these old tools. There's an energy from them. And this sort of started when I was first starting to build miniatures. I was at a flea market, and I bought a watchmaker's tool catalog from the 1920s for $2. And I wanted everything in it, and I sort of did that. But I had no idea that was going to cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next 40 years. And I amassed a huge tool collection, and now I lend things to places like the Smithsonian. My workshop is a mixture of new and old tools. And when I say new, we have to put that in sort of perspective, because the newest machine down here is from 1968. There's no CNC, computer-driven, there's no 3D printers, nothing like that. To me, those tools have no soul, so I don't use them. I'm old school. And I'm so old school that when the National Park Service wanted to restore Thomas Edison and the Wright Brothers workshop, they came to me because I use the same tools they do. So I helped with that. When I was the kid, I was looking through the glass, at the objects. Now, the museums take them off display and say, do you want to see this and handle it? So I've been really fortunate to get to handle some of the most amazing objects in the world. And this is a 300-year-old ivory turning. And I'm fascinated by these. They were done on a machine called a Rose engine. I had to have one. This one I had FedExed from Paris. It's like a three-dimensional spirograph. It's a lot of fun. I made this wassail bowl with it, a fancy name for a punch bowl. It's about 1.5 inches high. This is in the Art Institute of Chicago. You know, what I've learned in all doing this, I like to share, and I love to teach people how to do things and try to get them to do what they thought was impossible. And this thing I've had with museums all my life has just been so much fun. A few years ago, the Nelson borrowed some pieces that I had made, and one was this little box. I love making boxes. My mother did the needlepoint on it, and I built the box, and I teased her. I said, who would have thought the needlepoint you did at your dining room table would be in the little box your kid built in the basement would be in a museum with famous paintings on the wall? The guiding thing is gold jewel box, but the guiding thing about what I do is each piece has to be better in some way than whatever you did before. You never do the same. You have to do better. And people often ask me, well, what's your favorite piece? Well, the answer is always the same. My favorite piece is the next piece I do. I just have to get better. The latest box I've done was this Dutch strong box. There's hundreds of pieces of marquetry, of which 80% is covered over with the fancy brasses. It sits on a base by my friend Lloyd McCaffrey, and when you unlock it, it's filled with secret compartments and little drawers. The last piece I'm going to show you is this microscope. And this is made of pure gold, and the barrel is chagrin, which is shark skin. And it's a copy from one that Pesmalt made for Louis XV. And all of the royal courts had people called mechanicians, which in a sense is what I am. And it has nothing to do with car mechanics. They didn't have cars. It's about mechanics and engineering, art and science, all rolled into one. And that's what I do. And to me, part of the whole thing of doing these miniatures is the discovery of how and figuring out how to make these. And one of the things I learned in this, you can't polish pure gold. If you do, you touch it and it goes flat. And I read the old text, and it said, you burnish it with the tooth of a wolf. I was fresh out of wolves. However, I had my puppy's teeth. As she lost them and dropped them around the house, I picked them up, and this was burnished with puppy's teeth. So this world of discovery to me is all very, very personal. And really, in these last 40 years, well, all I've really been doing is making beautiful objects to keep people's eyes happy. Thank you very much.